Hello and welcome to the Travelling Through podcast. To those of you listening for the first time, I am Emma, your podcast host, and each week I'm out and about chatting to Londoners and those who love, live and work in this big and glorious city. Today my guest is Alicia Colson, who actually visited the bookshop on many an occasion, and it was great to catch up with her and walk and talk through a part of London which I had not been to for a long time, talking about archaeology, her experiences as an ethno-historian, and we also talk about the Boreal Forest, where Alicia completed her PhD. We'll talk about Namibia, chocolate and avocado. Enjoy. Oh, well, it's a bit of a windy morning this morning and we're at the Imperial War Museum where I've just met up with Alicia Colson. Hello, Alicia.
Hello, Emma.
It's been a while.
Yes, it has.
I'm glad we agreed to meet today and not yesterday when Storm Barra was crashing around us and it was all kinds of weather, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
But it's still very windy, but we'll do our best to stay out of it, and we're going to walk and talk about archaeology and everything else in between.
Sounds good.
Yeah? So we're going to walk from the grounds or the gardens of the Imperial War Museum. Is this a favourite place of yours?
I like walking through it, actually.
Do you? Did you used to walk through here to get to the bookshop?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah?
Yeah. Or I'd walk past it, actually.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, on that far route over there, up past it, or sometimes through it.
Okay.
And there's a path that runs through it, and there's some trees, and the trees are always amazing. And the far line, which is on the edges of the Kennington Road, has flowers of different times in different parts of the year.
Yes.
And in the summertime, that far corner, which sort of looks very desolate now given the winter time.
It is. It's just got loads of autumn leaves dancing across the grass, haven't
Well,
we?
actually in the summer it's actually chock-a-block with meadow flowers. It's so pretty.
That's right. Actually, I remember there's also the daffodils.
Yeah.
Amazing carpeted daffodils.
And so the carpets have been increased in size of daffodils, and they've increased the quantity, especially in that corner, it's increased sort of wild poppies and flowers, and so it's totally not mown, and it's really pretty. It's
Yes.
it's sort of like, I'm not in a manicured environment.
No, it's quite unusual for London, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mind you, more and more parks are leaving
Yeah.
the wild flowers for a bit longer before they
so these
mow them all off.
I don't think they mow them at all.
Don't they?
No, and so because I've seen it when they'll often see the guy who mows the grounds has mown the grounds, but he leaves them alone.
He mows around them rather than through them.
Rather than through them. It's like yay. But they're really, really pretty, and it's just like I'm so glad because nature isn't sort of manicured.
No,
it's got its own method of doing things.
It does. It has its own way. Which direction are we?
We could go down St George Street and then walk through Elephant and then cross. You'll see the new Elephant because that whole sort of block is gone now.
Yes, it has, hasn't it? What a big difference. Okay, let's do that.
And then you can we can walk through the Latin American, South American area, which is really cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like it.
Is it? Because I was very disappointed because it was an amazing hub, wasn't it, for the South American community with the markets and the shops and everything. But have some of them still survived? Or
some of them have survived, and they've put them in. They've made I don't know who it was. Must have been the local council or the developer or whomever. Have made it possible to have lots of little shops. So they've all moved, and they're moving in. And there's Sayre Street, I think it's called. I always say it incorrectly. It's incredible. So it is like little South America. And what makes it interesting is that you also get shops from Korea and Chinatown, and so it's sort of this really eclectic mix of South America, stroke Asia. which is nice in a way, but it sort of always reminds me of the fact that there's a large Japanese community in Brazil, and they came in the early, I think it was the late 19th century. I always think of that example whenever I'm like, oh look, it's right next to this South American area.
And of course your interest in Brazil is because, were you born there?
No, I used to live there.
You lived there?
I lived there as a child. I went there when I was 6. We went to school and I forgot English. That's why I learnt Brazilian, so I learnt how to read and write Brazilian Portuguese. It's actually slightly different. Yeah. They don't swallow their vowels.
Okay.
So
give me an example between the two.
Well, if you listen to Portuguese, it sounds. Some people sometimes mistake it for Russian, but that's because they hear all the consonants. Well, the Brazilians tend to sing and when they speak.
Yes. Whereabouts in Brazil?
In southern Brazil, which is Ilha de Santa Catarina, there's a southernmost archipelago, and it has about, I now know, 33 islands. And,
Wow.
one large island, which is several times the size of the Isle of Wight.
Right.
So it's quite big.
It is big, yes.
Now it has three national parks in it. It's got the last sort of remaining example of coastal rainforest. Has freshwater lagoons. We live by the side of a freshwater lagoon.
Oh wow! So you lived there, but at that time, I suppose you had no idea that you were going to be an archaeologist, or.
I like going to archives and forts and sort of exploring. And I was only 6, 7. I didn't really know anything about that, and I just thought I liked talking to people.
So as an adult, did you end up going back there for any particular research?
Yes, here will be quiet.
Okay.
No, I went back just to visit, and it was strange because I discovered sort of the fact that I really like certain things, such as a sort of sweet and savoury combination, which is things like cheese and apricot jam and tuna fish mayo, which sounds disgusting if you're English, but actually it's quite pleasant.
Is it?
Well, I like the cheese and fruit mix.
Okay.
And that's very Brazilian.
Cheese and fruit, yes, like apple and cheese.
Yeah, or I like apricot jam and cheese is great.
Yes.
I discovered a lot of people who, when I was a teenager in England, because I didn't watch any of those English TV shows.
Okay.
No idea, can't connect. Sorry. Don't ask me about that cultural reference. It's sort of gone over my head. So what it meant was, when I went back, I discovered, okay, I understand why I like those combinations.
Okay.
I understand why certain flavours appeal to me, or bright colours, or why is it I really like bright colours. I find a hard time with pale colours. Well, I discovered in Brazil it's very bright.
Yes, yeah.
Pale colours are completely washed out.
Yes.
They don't work. So I was like, okay, so it's things like that.
Interesting.
And the ways of expressing things. Sometimes I think some things are expressed better in Brazilian than in English, because in English you just can't really say it. But that's because it sort of prompted my interest in words. Sometimes you can express visual things far easier in Brazilian than you can in English.
Okay.
So it made me start thinking about, I realised, why was I interested in words and interested in visual stuff.
Yes.
But that's because in Brazil, people will be really eloquent in terms of how they express visual imagery, but they may not necessarily know how to read and write. You can cross through here, through the park, and then come out.
This is West Square. I love this square.
I like the square.
It's always slightly unkempt, which I like about it. Maybe that's very rude to say for the people who look after it. Maybe it's the times I've come through, it's always slightly unkempt. Maybe it's always winter. Maybe that's the
I like it because...
But I like it.
I like it. These mulberry trees are out.
I didn't realise they were mulberry trees.
They're mulberry trees. Yeah, they have mulberries.
Do they?
Yeah, they're a bit... well, this year they were a bit bitter.
Okay.
But I think there wasn't enough rain to make sure that they were sort of plump.
Yes. Have you? So you've harvested?
No, I wouldn't say harvest. I picked them occasionally. I tried them. I wanted to see what they were like, because I picked them when my grandparents, my father's parents, lived on the Isle of Wight on the coast. There was a big garden next to it which we were allowed to explore. It was a house that was formerly lived in by Nelson's mistress, Emma Hamilton.
Yes.
So they had a huge old mulberry tree which everyone used to climb. I remember climbing it, mulberry season time, ate them, and I remember I had a t-shirt on and it got completely covered in stains. I remember going back to my grandmother's going, she's eating mulberries again, and I'm like, no, and she's like, yes.
They're all over you.
They're all over you.
The remains of.
They stain really badly, but I know they're delicious. And they were big, plump monsters, but these things, I don't think they had enough rain.
Okay.
So they were a bit sad and bitter this year, but they should be sweet and quite nice.
Yes. So now we've come out onto Austral
Street.
Coming back to Brazil then. So Brazil, you spent some of your formative years.
Yeah.
So obviously the Brazilian and then now Portuguese has stuck as language.
Yeah.
And then did you come back to the UK?
I came back to the UK and discovered I didn't speak English. And I thought I did. My parents tried really hard to make sure that we learnt English. And to the point they used to read us all the English classics, because my sister and I had all the Wind in the Willows. We looked at the pictures.
Yes. But you didn't take in the words, so you didn't know. Interesting.
No.
So that was a huge shock to your parents, no doubt.
It was a huge shock.
They had two children that couldn't actually read English, but you could obviously speak it.
No.
You couldn't speak it?
Not very well, no.
Okay.
No, we thought we were speaking English. Right. We didn't know we were speaking Brazilian. So from the point, my sister was very sad when she went to school and just said, "Oh, but no one speaks English."
Sometimes you hear it here with the young French children at the lycée, and they're speaking English and French all at the same time.
It wasn't even that, because I've done that in Quebec. When I lived in Quebec, we used to sort of pick whichever language we felt like using, and then splatter all the words in to fit accordingly, because we knew that the people who were around us were actually multilingual.
So you came back to school?
Came back to school here.
Yes.
It was strange because in the schools, they often expect you to have same cultural references, and they thought I was slightly weird because I didn't sound the same or couldn't connect. But in retrospect, it was because I was just learning in English again.
Yes.
Here the whole time I did sort of A-levels at sixth form college, went to UCL,
which is the University College
London. Did archaeology, thinking, be fun to be outdoors and do something, because I like exploring.
Okay. And that obviously came from your very early years in Brazil.
Yeah, and sort of wandering around, yeah.
So when did Canada come into all of this?
Oh, my mother's parents, they were American from Chicago. They had gone up to Canada in the 1930s with my grandfather, my great-uncle, canoed up there. And
he canoed?
They drove 18 hours and then you canoed up to Red Lake, which is... Maps back in the 30s were quite basic. They still, in some regions of Canada, they still are. They're mapped by push plane, so just a plane that flies over.
Yes.
And so they had some maps, and so he and his brother went on a canoeing trip, and that's when he just decided he wanted to go spend there, because he was a wildlife photographer.
Okay.
And filmmaker, so he ended up buying some property there, and he used to go there and do stuff for 4 to 6 months a year, and then go back to Chicago. But then the war came along, as in World War II, but it was 1941 when the US went into the war, and so he was commandeered making films for the US Armed Forces. So he went, obviously, in the part of the war effort to do that. And then we went to Canada really because he retired from the States to Canada. He'd worked in Hollywood in advertising. He didn't really like it.
Okay.
And so he wanted to go and be a sculptor and go to the backwoods. So he went to where he went in the 30s and 40s, because in the 40s he'd run, before the war, he'd run a boys' camp. I don't know how much you know about sort of North American society, where you often have these camps where kids are sorted out, where they have sort of behavioural problems. So he ran a camp for boys where they went fishing and canoeing, and where kids would go to 6 weeks and they'd be straightened out.
Okay,
in that North America.
Sounds terrifying.
It's not that bad. Not that bad, really.
Sounds terrifying they're being straightened out, but I imagine they've just, it's also such a change of environment for them that it was...
They sort of learned a sense of self and things like that.
Hello, father of Alicia. Very well, lovely to see you. But we're in mid conversation, so we've got to keep going.
And I'm late.
Oh, okay. Bye. Lovely to see you.
How
extraordinary was that?
There we go. Unplanned. And they go on canoeing trips, camping, fishing, wilderness skills.
How did you end up then there?
Because he went. So it's a long story. He was there.
That was your mother's father. My
grandmother. They had got divorced in the 60s. In their 60s, but in the 70s. She had moved to southern Ontario to be near my uncle, who'd also moved from the States to Canada.
Yes.
And which is quite normal.
Okay.
Actually, in North America, lots of people do it.
Yes.
So we went to visit him. He was quite strong-minded. He was a bit bossy because he was a film director, so he was used to sort of telling people what to do. And a friend of his, who was a regional archaeologist, but the area he looked after was about the area the size of Germany and France.
When you say looked after
in terms of government official. So he'd come to visit for the day, because people would, when they come and visit in that part of the world, because it's so remote, it's like people would drive an hour to go and see some friends.
Right. Yes,
and because of vast distances.
Yes.
So he popped by on the way to some other, because he was the regional archaeologist. So it meant that he would have to check the work of all the other archaeologists who were working below him.
Right.
So it meant that he would drive from excavation to excavation, and on his way from one excavation to another one, he'd stop and visit friends.
Yes.
And that time he stopped.
Makes sense.
Makes sense. If you got to drive past it, you might as well say hello. But you drop in and say hello for coffee.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of thing. You never know when people are coming. They just drop by. And he said, oh, what are you doing on this day? I'm going, if you want to come and volunteer in an excavation about 45 minutes south, come for the day. Mm-hmm. You would have to be, so he said he would come at 6 a.m, pick me up, and then spend the whole day there, and he'd go and do some other stuff, check out some other sites that are being excavated, and then drive past, and he could pick me up and then drop me off.
Yes.
And then have another cup of coffee. And I said, why not? And that's how I got involved in northwestern Ontario, because it's what's it like? It's the Boreal subarctic.
So was this after you'd already
it was
completed your archaeology?
No, this is
what sparked your interest in
it was before. It was before I was at secondary school.
Okay.
And I knew I liked history. I thought of doing history, but I liked anthropology because my mother was an anthropologist. But I remember asking where to do history, and my dad was like, oh, my blah, 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 friend is here, and blah, 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 friend is there. And I kept thinking, I can't go to a department where you know someone. I'd like to go somewhere where you actually don't know someone. And how do I achieve that?
How do I get away from all these people?
Exactly.
Well, nobody will know me.
Exactly. Never worked. Plus it didn't work. I thought, well, I'll pick archaeology. It's in the middle. It's not history, it's not anthropology, but it's in the middle. Actually, you have to deal with all three, I know now.
Yes.
In retrospect.
Yeah. Shall we go up this side street to get to the top of Elephant and Castle, or will we miss all
the stuff is all down that side.
Is it? Oh, well,
yeah.
then let's go this side then.
I'm just thinking it's really noisy.
It's fine. We'll manage for a little while and then we'll go off. Wow, look at it! I can't believe this.
I thought I'd show you. Isn't that amazing?
Oh my goodness! It's just all apartment blocks.
Yeah, but if you
the Shard.
And the Shard, and if you cross over the other side of the train station, it's a park.
Crikey! This is all right. I'm completely flabbergasted. But it's been a while because I came through Elephant Castle on the bus, but the whole of the middle section was still open, but it's now all boarded off.
Yeah, it's all dirt. If you can wander around this side, and they change fairly frequently, but these cellophane windows where you can look in.
Oh yes.
And it's just dirt and hole.
So we're going to walk towards where
you wanted to go the park. So if we go round.
Okay.
So if you go across where those people are crossing right now. Yes. And then we'll go the bottom end of the hole instead of the.
Okay.
And then we'll pass by a lot of the sort of South American. And do you see? You know the other entrance to Elephant Castle's over there.
Yes.
Then there is a corner, and underneath that corner was this 1960s building, which is sort of nondescript and pretty grim, brutalist.
Yes.
The ground floor has now got some of those little shops.
Oh, has it? Okay.
Yeah. It's a shock, isn't it?
So it is a big shock, actually. Because there was another 1960s building that seems to have disappeared, where there was the market.
Over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was that huge. It's only just come down.
Has it?
Yeah. And it took ages because they were taking it piece by piece.
Yeah. It's like a whole piece of history is just disappeared.
Yes. Yes.
I've never seen it quite like that. It's quite shocking.
It's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, the first time I came, I didn't really notice it had been there. That they were actually working on it until I took the train, the overland, and it was just like, what? I can see through the building.
So anybody who knew Elephant and Castle, well, even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago,
or even a few months ago.
Oh, really? We'll have to come back and see for your own eyes how it has changed. And
it really
Not
has
sure it's for the better,
changed.
but I suppose I'm not really in a position to judge
I don't
until
know.
I go and visit what's here. But it's hard to see what is here except for apartment blocks.
On the other side of the train tracks, it's quite interesting. It's completely not what I expected.
Yeah.
I remember coming out of when the end of the first lockdown, and during the first lockdown, I remember walking around here, and you get these high-speed sports cars racing up and down. It was nuts.
Yeah. But as it is, Elephant Castle is still just one big traffic jam, isn't
Yes.
it? It's a big bus
Yeah.
bus hub, isn't it? Where you can go in many directions from here, and it's just multiple pedestrian crossings as well. And it seems even windier, but maybe this is just the end of Storm Barra whipping its last windy gusts at us.
This is always changing, this area.
It's partly a student area as well, I think.
Yeah, there's lots of little South American shops there.
Okay.
Are
there any that are a favourite for you?
Some of them are so new, I don't know.
Yeah. Brazilian hair salon.
There's a pineapple, there's a Brazilian hair salon.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe I do need to come and explore a
Down
little
here, there's a panaderia, the Colombian.
Okay, so
There's lots of little Colombians and Ecuadorians down that street. I didn't really notice it until lockdown, and then I noticed that lots of...
What is the name of that street? It's something walk, hang on. Is this the way we want to be going anyway?
Yes.
Oh yeah, so Casa Colombia Panaderia, and it's called Maldonado Walk.
Yeah.
So they're literally just in the railway
Arches.
the railway arches underneath the railway line. So come and check it out, guys.
It's worth it.
You're
The
in the
food is
area.
really good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've often there's a Ecuadorian place. I've been for hot chocolate and cake.
Hot chocolate and cake.
Yeah,
Sounds great.
It's great. Look at this.
My goodness. So everything is just boarded up. It's like big gashes being taken out of the landscape. And more apartment blocks. But
So,
again,
look
la
at this.
vida loca.
And this is like a tiny little supermarket. There's tiny little stores underneath here. It's amazing.
Is this a little supermarket, is it?
Well, it's sort of not the supermarket. There's like a travel agent,
Chatica?
a cafeteria. I don't know what you call it in English. Little place where you can go and get coffee and cake and
Okay, like
and
a little
sandwiches.
cafe, really.
Cafe, yeah.
And Chatica, cafe, deli, and bakery.
Oh, this one's Colombian.
Yeah.
They do really good arepas and all sorts of things, and coffee and sugar. And this one is like printer, clothing,
El
photo.
Arco del Centro. Yeah. If you can't pick it up, drag it.
Yes. Have you seen this?
Castle Square. My goodness. So this is almost. Oh no! It's like a replica of the elephant castle with the elephant on the corner. Does that come from the original? No.
I don't know. It looks too small. It's also red. It's not pink, is it?
Wow.
Oh, this is the Andes shop. That's a supermarket. It's incredible. It has the most amazing vegetables like yucca and avocados, which are huge. Not your house avocado, your South American avocado, which are enormous.
Okay. Wow. I'm definitely. That's called Distriandina.
Distriandina.
The Latin taste.
And
Okay.
everything in there is from the sort of the Andes, Colombia, Ecuador. So if you cross over, you can see what's all like.
Not good if you want to be thinking the environment, sustainability.
No.
If your avocado and your whatever has come from Argentina or however.
Colombia.
Colombia.
Well, otherwise it's from Mexico. It's the same problem.
Yeah. Yes. It's always a dilemma. Now we've gone elephants galore, crikey. Like a little children's park.
Well, you can't climb on them. That's the sort of. So I
it's
don't really
just
know why they're here. I just think they're just here
for show.
Well, you can sit on the smaller ones, but
So what is this park called then? Castle Square, okay.
This is Castle Square. This is lots of the little shops that are actually on the. If you look at the names, you can they obviously
They've come from the
other place.
Laughland Communications. Doesn't sound very South American, but there we go.
No, original Caribbean spies.
El Guambra does, but we'll have to come and investigate when we got a little more time. Well, thank you for introducing me to this area, Alicia. Because
that's right.
It's a bit. I'm a bit in shock, though.
No, you look like you're in shock.
Wasn't what I was expecting at all. It also is very landscaped, isn't it?
It's very landscaped. It's by an Australian company, apparently. He's the developer.
Coming back to your archaeology, we kind of sidetracked there a bit, but so you completed your degree and then
I was just like, what am I going to do? It's all very well doing through, and I had in the time I'd actually been working in the summer in northern Ontario, surveying areas of land that some of it became provincial parks, and learning how sort of bush skills. So how do you live for up to 3 weeks at a time in the middle of nowhere? So I used to go from there to here, come back to London and sort of go, oh, this is
too much of a
shock. It was a real shock for about a few weeks, and then it was okay. Got used to it. But I realised I liked that contrast.
Okay.
So the question was like, how do you do that? And that was the tough one. So, and I did some sort of temping jobs, and tried different things, and then just applied to do stuff really. And
how easy, having got your degree in archaeology, was it to then find digs or projects that interest you? I mean, is it a case that there is a lot out there, but there's also a lot of competition for it?
Yeah, well, it was horribly hard, but I also realised I hadn't gone through the sort of the British system, whereby you are on excavation all the time. But that's because I hadn't specialised in British archaeology.
Okay.
So it's actually really.
So what was your specialism?
Well, it's the Americas, really.
Okay. So this is where your love of the Boreal Forest came
from, yeah.
And the Boreal Forest is actually in the central part of Canada, is it?
It's the forest that goes right around the circumpolar. It's the green area. It's one of the lungs. It's like the Amazon.
Okay.
And it's called the Boreal Forest, but it's a mixture of lakes and trees and swamps and coniferous woods, and kind of projects were surveying, finding sites, because some areas had been mapped by bush plane, and I was sort of one of the first teams of people who'd been in there after forestry, really.
Okay.
I realised I liked the challenge of finding new things, as in, okay, this is, how do we deal with this? How do we understand it? I'm working with people who live there all the time.
Yes.
And how do you explain things that actually might seem quite integral to somebody who lives there all the time, but actually isn't? And so what does the Boreal Forest sort of mean to the rest of the world? Well, it's a lung, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge
and
lung.
Very important.
Very important, and it's incredibly fragile. And I met sort of people who were gold miners, gold prospectors, learnt how to think about soil samples in terms of the gold quantity that come out, because the area is actually an industrial forest. It's always being used.
The Boreal Forest work that you're doing is integral to in terms of trying to protect its future.
Well, it's to think about its future, and I'm working now. It's connected now. I'm working with an elder from a northern community, because they have these paintings, which have rock paintings, and the thing is, a lot of the academics will say, oh, it's part of their animism. It's connected to animism. Well, these communities are actually they practice animism, as in everything is alive.
Okay.
There's a spirit, or the rocks are alive, the trees are alive. It might sound cuckoo, but it's a different way of looking at the world, and understanding that we as human beings are very much part of it, one of many components. We're not the only thing. So I was contacted this March by an elder saying, I've read your work. I like your PhD supervisor, because I ended up going to McGill in Montreal to do a PhD because what I realised after my first degree is what I realised I was actually interested in how the intellectual frameworks of understanding the past affect how we read the past. So you might have several ways of looking at the world, but the mindset you have will dictate the bits of information that you put together to try and understand your puzzle.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I realised all of the archaeologists here were saying you have to take this approach, this being the post-processual approach. And I was just like, it doesn't make sense. But why should It's called post-processual. Post-processual. But it really means the archaeologist concerned will say, well, I think it's this, and so you have to agree with me. And I kept thinking, but the evidence doesn't always add up. What do that's like having a puzzle, because the problem is when you're understanding archaeology, you have a puzzle, you just have a jigsaw, you have all these pieces, but you don't have all the pieces. So you're trying to fit the pieces together and you don't really know what the picture was.
Okay.
And you don't know all the connections, and the likelihood of you not having all the pieces. It's a bit like one of those puzzles that you buy in a second-hand shop.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
there's always a few pieces missing.
And you're just like, I know it fits here, and you're busy trying to squish it in.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's what it is.
Okay.
Like, that's what archaeology is like.
So what did this elder, what does he want you to get involved with specifically?
He wanted me to talk about some painting, an archaeological site, a pictograph site that his father had painted, and what did the images mean. Because usually what happens is an archaeologist or an anthropologist will say, oh, I'm interested in this group of people, and see whether they can go and visit them and ask them some questions. So it was a bit of a role reversal.
Yeah.
So he was saying, I want to talk to you, rather than being saying, oh, I fancy talking to you. And usually if it's the
other way around.
The researcher goes in, then obviously there's a risk that the researcher's just going to be told stuff.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, they won't necessarily find out what's really happening, they'll just be told what's happening.
Okay.
So it means that you possibly get a case whereby the researcher is getting the information that they want to fill their own view.
Right.
So it's confirming observations or confirming conceptions versus the other way around.
And obviously still Southwark Town Hall bolted up, so beautiful building actually, lovely carving.
Gorgeous.
Stone carving.
There was a public library. And the library's moved down there actually.
Yeah, okay. So we're now on the Walworth Road?
We're on the Walworth Road. Okay. And they actually, in that library, what's really interesting, they have the remains of the collection of the first museum in England.
Oh wow, okay. Interesting. So that's worth a visit at some point.
Oh, it's definitely worth a visit. We can go and have a look at the picture if you want. It's just back back there. It's just
before you go on to this one, can we just finish off?
Sure.
So with the elder, and so you have you taken this on board? Is this something to go forward with in the future? Because obviously travel is not very possible at the moment.
Oh, we're actually doing it on Zoom.
Are you doing it on Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's really interesting. So archaeology via Zoom.
It's via Zoom.
Or is it just just a discussion rather than?
It's actually archaeology in the sense of it's the French North American understanding of archaeology, where it incorporates anthropology, because there's the French American school, and then there's the British school. The British school doesn't include anthropology. Okay. French Americans do.
And to the listeners who don't perhaps totally understand what you mean by anthropology, what if you could say it in a nutshell?
It's such as, how do people work? How do we think? How do human beings organise their society?
Okay.
How do we
function
as not biologically, but actually how does a society function?
Okay.
Here it is. It's this, and this heritage centre is very interesting because it has collections in their heritage, which I read about because I did a German-style PhD, which meant that I had to do anthropology and art history and many more disciplines than you do here.
Yes.
So it's a lot longer. I had to look at collections being archival collections of museums that had existed since the 15th century onwards. So I was looking through the library and I found a collection talking about the Lever Museum, and it was on vellum, and it was the first one, and it was by the Lever family, who became the Wellcome.
Oh, the Wellcome Institute.
Yeah, it's sort of long. It was like several hundred years ago, and they had a collection of. They collected stuff from captains, because the thing is that captains who were on ships during the 17th, 18th and 19th century used to pick up sort of odd things.
Yes.
And then they bring them back and say, oh, look what this oddity I have here. And so this family ended up buying all of them and sort of creating what we'd call a museum now.
Yes, yeah.
And they had a catalogue, and the catalogue was illustrated on vellum.
Okay.
And some of the items in that catalogue are here.
Interesting. So this whole discussion and talking about archaeology is almost as involved and interwoven as it is trying to get the story out of you, Alicia. It sort of weaves.
It sort of goes everywhere. Yeah. So it's not linear. That's the problem.
So from the likes of the Boreal Forest and now Zoom archaeology, as it were, the other part of your interest is in Namibia with
in Spain. That's because
the wall paintings.
Yeah, in Spain. I mean, I'm actually interested in citizen science, and I always have been, because that's how I was trained as an archaeologist.
Citizen science. Okay, that's
a
new expression for me. I wasn't.
Okay, it's really saying you've got to empower people, because it's about how much power as in to be able to do what you do as a researcher. So when I trained to be an archaeologist, I was taught that every skill I learned, I had to be able to teach somebody else how to do it.
Right.
So the whole point was we have to empower others. I was lucky to have had an education at a university, so I had to be able to pass those skills on.
Okay.
Somebody who may not have had the opportunity by any sheer happenstance, but they actually might be interested in what they were looking at.
Yeah.
So while I was studying rock paintings, the teams were composed by the guy who was a good friend of my grandfather. He would ensure that there was always one or two people who were the potential dropouts from some secondary school, really. The kids who weren't doing very well, who the teachers had always said, well, I don't think she's going anywhere because blah, blah, blah. But it might be they just hadn't realised, learning was interesting.
Yes.
Because learning school can be utterly boring.
Well, it depends who's teaching you as well,
exactly.
I think.
Can be. It depends an awful lot on the teacher.
Yeah.
So I'd always been doing this the whole way through, working in the Boreal Forest. And when I did some field work in the States, Four Corners area. I went to Wisconsin.
Where's the Four Corners area?
Four Corners area is a North American term for the corner where Arizona meets New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah.
Okay.
That's called Four Corners.
Okay, I didn't know that. There we go. We talk about the four corners of the world, but not four corners.
Yeah, and
States.
they are 90 degrees.
Okay. Gosh.
So I went there to a teaching research center called Cortez, Colorado, and I went there, and I worked there as a supervisor, which was good fun actually. So I learned about the area. And
you were teaching?
I was just a supervisor on a dig, so I was teaching people who were junior to me how to excavate.
Okay.
And record an object when you found it, and how to treat an object if it started turning up in the middle of your square.
Right.
So I got into it because it's part of my training. So when I came back to the UK, I thought I'd really like to do that, because I felt that, I've been really lucky to go and do a PhD and I have a bunch of skills, and if you can't pass them on all by teaching.
Yes.
And I wasn't able to get a teaching position, so I thought if I did something like work for British Exploring, which I don't know if you know of, British Exploring Society.
Okay.
And everyone who works them is a volunteer. So I looked at them and I thought, I'd like a change from the Boreal Forest, because it would be, where else am I interested? And I actually bumped into someone in a pub actually after a talk which I went to called Explorers Connect. And someone said, have you ever thought of going to the desert? And I was like, no, never thought of going to the desert. It's appealed, but I've never actually, the possibilities never come up. And he's like, well, why didn't you think about it? So, and then mentioned British Exploring. So I looked up the website, British Exploring website. I saw that they were looking for 2 people, one to do a sort of a leader, and the other one was a chief scientist. And I applied for a leader position, and I went for the interview, and they said, oh, actually, how about chief scientist? And I was like, okay. So it was a bit of a shock.
Yes.
But I've always wanted to go there because I'd read a lot about it. It would be sort of a chance to go somewhere with a group of people who had background knowledge on the area, so it wouldn't be a sudden shock.
Yes.
And for me, it was like, wow, here's a place I've read about, thought about, written about, but I've never actually been.
Okay.
So I had to design citizen science programs.
Oh, we're just about to pass Just Eat, and it's disco attached.
Oh,
So it's like
oh yes.
KFC deliveries. There we go. That's the lovely cultural and rich tapestry of the Walworth Road.
Walworth Road. So that's how I went to Namibia.
Okay.
And it's because it combined empowering people to think and then feel better about themselves. And it was great because they were, how many there? It was like 45 young people between the ages of 16 and 22.
Okay.
Some of them were feeling really glum about life.
Yes.
And they came back 6 weeks later saying, it's great. And I'm like, I've achieved my result.
So that's really interesting. So in terms of your role and your focus was not so much on the archaeology itself, but actually engaging
them
young people.
We looked at, I worked with a chap who was a herpetologist, so we had a sort of a module on looking at the wild and the environment and thinking about herpetology, which is actually reptiles.
Okay, I was thinking of grasses and herbs, but herpetology is reptiles.
Reptiles.
There you go. So I think I need to go on your course. Yes. Oh, this is really interesting. This is East Street Market, which is fantastic. Lots of things great place to come and explore if you're in the area of SE17.
And Tuesdays is always fabric and clothing.
On Tuesdays, is it?
Yeah.
What's today? Today's Wednesday.
Today's Wednesday.
Okay, I didn't realise that.
And they are different on different days of the weeks. I mean, on Saturday you get lots of vegetables and fruits.
Yes, that's the day I've been on.
Yeah.
Are we going to walk down this way?
So we can walk Barra straight. So we had different modules on looking at the environment. We had one on soil science. It was done by one of the trainee leaders, they're called. They're people who want to learn how to do this. So she was really interested in soil samples and soil and how it's important to retaining moisture. So she devised a couple of experiments which everyone worked through and said, okay, we understand there's a soil structure. It's not just this stuff that's on the ground.
Yes.
We did camera traps. We walked on a couple of paths where we knew the wild cats were. So we noticed that if the path was just left as is, they would sort of walk up and down. But if you take a rake and actually put lines on the path, then they won't cross, the cats wouldn't cross it.
Oh wow, interesting.
So we sort of looked at animal behaviour and things like that. So, because I worked with a couple of people who were with me and they were biologists and in different disciplines. So it was quite fun.
Yes. So that's a very different discipline to what you were doing in the Boreal Forest.
It was in a way, but it wasn't, because it was still the question of transferring the skills.
Okay, yeah.
So it was a continuation.
Okay.
And we also, a continuation of it was that we walked up the Bramberg mountain and climbed up it.
Okay.
I went to have a look for some pictograph sites, which was quite, we went up the northeast corner of the Bramberg, which is it's Namibia's biggest mountain.
Is it? Okay.
Yes.
How high is it?
I'm not sure actually. I should know since I've been up it. Which is really embarrassing.
How long did it take to walk up it?
It took us 3 days to climb up part of the northeast, and we were We knew it's one of the steepest sides. There's not much water, which is why people haven't actually been up there, because of the lack of water. We had to carry it.
Okay.
We went up there for about 10 days.
Crikey. So what, you all carrying?
We carried our water. About 7 of us went up, and
you carried enough water for 10 days?
we had to. We got a water.
How much?
We found a spring, fortunately.
Okay. So
But
how
we
much
had-
water did you carry then initially?
Initially, we
Between
carried
you?
enough for a day,
Okay.
but we knew we had to find water.
Yeah.
And we found a spring, because you can see where there are trees growing up, so you know if there's a tree, it's a spring.
Right.
So we found this incredible tree. It was huge. It was totally quite idyllic, sort of those photographs you always think of, the 19th century tree,
Yeah.
back and beyond, deepest, darkest Africa. But the tree was incredible, and there was a spring, so we boiled water and processed it and then put it in containers. And then we ended up being there, and we went exploring, and we found about 9 pictograph sites, actually.
Pictograph sites?
Rock paintings, yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Which you were able to record and...
We photographed them
Mhm.
and recorded that they were there, and filled out the prerequisite forms as required by the Trust for African Rock Art.
Okay.
And then when we got back to the UK, we submitted the lot.
So this is the thing, is it with archaeology, is it actually the excitement of going to these sites? Is it the exploration, or is it the thought of coming back and being able to write up what you found? I mean, what part of it is the most exciting for you?
That's a good question. I think it's the exploring side, but I actually enjoy the writing up. I know a lot of people don't.
Okay.
I quite like it.
Yeah.
And really trying to understand, what can I find out? What does it tell me? But at the same time, I know that I may never know.
Okay.
So I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yes.
But
Is it a case that sometimes you'll only know part of the story, or you only know part of...
well, I know that when I surveyed, because I surveyed the Lake of the Woods for my PhD, and it's the size of, I think it's probably about the size of Wales. It's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I recorded it diligently, and I followed all the rules.
Okay.
It sounds really small. The word lake is very deceiving.
Yeah. In this instance, yeah.
It's got 42,000 kilometres,
Oh my word.
and it's got 14,000 islands, so it's really quite big.
Massive.
And I found some sites. I recorded the ones I knew that they were there. I found those as well. I added in some new variables on the ground, and I tested a couple of ideas that archaeologists in the area had suggested. Oh, they're always east and west facing, and I was like, don't think so.
What are always east
Or
facing?
rock paintings.
Oh, the rock paintings. And how did you go about the research? Was it
I
by
used to-
canoe yourself, like your
No.
grandfather, or was it
No,
by,
it wasn't.
by
It was
bush plane or
It
walking?
was by. It took a colleague and 2 colleagues and I 3.5 months. We surveyed the whole lake
Crikey.
by boat.
By boat.
We had an engine, and we decided none of this.
No rowing.
No rowing. Well, the problem is some of it's an inland sea. It's really quite large. If you look on the map of North America, you have the Great Lakes, and then you have the next big body of water is Lake of the Woods. So it took 3.5 months every day. We would
Living
go
on the boat?
almost. You'd go home to sleep.
But where's home if you're in the middle of a lake?
It was a log cabin.
Okay, so you would go out from the log cabin and
Yeah.
explore it. And of course, if there are islands as well, you could...
The islands we knew we could stop, but we followed maritime law, because that's what the law that exists on the lake. In European terms, we'd consider it a sea, actually.
Okay.
But there it's considered a lake, which is
Right.
quite funny.
And maritime law what
Means
does that
if
mean?
there's a storm,
Yeah.
you have the right to land on someone's dock or someone's property.
Okay.
And
Luckily. Did that happen at all?
Yes, it did. And we just worked with a good friend of mine, Mindy, and so we were on these islands. They're called the Barra Islands in the area, and we were on the south side, and we saw Fort Lightning, and we thought we're in a
run for it.
we have no choice. We either run for it to where is the question.
Yeah.
Or because we knew we had to get off the lake, so we just saw a dock and said, okay, we just, as she said, we rocked up.
Yeah.
We tied the boat on and we took everything out.
Yeah.
And I think we loaded on life jackets, ran up the dock, and we thought, well, they had a long eave to their house. It was a 1960s house, so it had these very A-frame, and so it had huge eaves. So we thought, well, we'll just stand under the eaves. Then we're at least out of the rain. And we didn't know anyone was there. And they're like, hi, visitors. And we're like, hi.
Not really.
Not really. We're only here
Fugitives
exactly.
from a storm.
And we're like, the storm's coming. And they're like, really? And then there's this crack.
Oh, God.
And they're like, yeah, why didn't you just come in? And we're like, we were quite happy with standing outside underneath the eaves, because they're like, no, come in. And they gave us coffee. It was really kind of them.
Very nice.
Very
so
nice.
Where are we going from here?
If you want to see the park, I was thinking we could carry on.
Okay. So Alicia, with all the different organisations that you're involved with here in the UK, but also abroad, I suppose, you're a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society.
Yep.
And also the Explorers Club.
Yep.
UK. And how have those organisations influenced what you've done in your professional life? Have they had an influence? I mean, have they provided funding, or have you applied and through them done something very, very interesting and exciting? Or is it the case that you do things that are very interesting and exciting, and then
they turn up afterwards?
They applaud you, or it's then a conduit through which you can then tell people what you've done, and others can then benefit from it and perhaps continue what you weren't able to do. I mean, how?
That's a good question. The Explorers Club I joined because the work I did when I was in Canada, a lot of my colleagues didn't like it because my supervisor had some stature in the field, so he encouraged me to challenge everything about archaeology.
Okay.
The archaeologists in Canada weren't happy because they're like, why did Bruce let you do that? And I'm like, well, he's the boss, he's the supervisor, you just let me do it. Okay, finished. And there's nothing I can do about it. If your supervisor says challenge X, you're like, all right then. So the Explorers Club for me was a means of saying, I achieved the PhD, I applied, and the project actually had a consequence for the field. So that's why I joined initially, because it was some means of just confirmation.
Okay.
And the biologists were saying, you've demonstrated that it doesn't matter, that the size of the Lake of the Woods is big, but it says that you need to think at a bigger scale in terms of data if you're going to look at something such as, why can't I see any patterns in the images? Sort of patterns. Why do I not see, for example, the same shape in specific geographical areas, or combinations of shapes? Because that's why I had been using. Because I had been in the work I did in Lake of the Woods, I was using experimental intelligent agents. I'm trying not to be technical now. Oh my goodness!
Is that a Google camera?
I'm wondering about that.
Are we going across there?
So we go across here, because then we go through into and then it's a park and it's very quiet.
Oh yeah, it is. It's like some film set, I think. Anyway.
So, and I had wanted originally in that piece of work to find out were the combinations of images occurring, because the archaeologists in the Canadian Shield, if you looked at the literature, had argued, there should be combinations. For example, several bison occur together, or bison occur with stick figures. Or you get 3 stick figures together, or you get 2 stick figures. So I was just testing that, and my work had demonstrated there were no combinations.
Okay.
Despite the fact that I had an area the size of Wales. If you go down, we walk down here, then we see there's a tunnel. I don't know what this is at all, actually.
I think it's some film set. We're just about to walk into a film set. They're blowing smoke across the grass,
smoke,
and then there's people with shields. Anyway, we'll keep going anyway.
So that
was the Explorers.
That was the Explorers, and so the Explorers Club sort of said yes. If you that was a sort of a confirmation, because the archaeologists weren't happy. My supervisor was happy, so it's an argument in the field. So the Explorers Club said, yeah, we like the fact that you were trying to push boundaries.
Okay. And isn't that what it's about anyway?
Well,
I mean, it's also,
I thought so,
aren't you
yes.
supposed to question and challenge what you see before you and see whether what other people have said before you, rather than just accept it?
Yeah.
Just
Well, that's what I thought.
check. But
Yeah,
okay.
that's what I thought. I thought you were supposed to set up a premise. You read everything you can, learn as much as you can from earlier literature or your experiences, draw on the training you had as an undergraduate, and then go out and see what you can find. Test all the assumptions.
Yeah.
Well, I did, and I applied intelligent agents, which were pattern matching. So I was looking at combinations of images. Should we go around there?
Yeah.
And weren't any patterns. It was negative evidence. And
Right.
I remember working with the computer scientists, because I did it at Southampton in computing science, and I remember them saying, you've got negative evidence here. How are your colleagues going to handle it? Well, I knew my supervisor would be fine,
Yes.
but he had said, let's hope it's positive. And I remember going back and saying, okay, and because I did the analysis in Southampton, so I got on the plane, got back, had it all on CDs, every way, shape and form you can possibly imagine to keep it. Went back to Montreal and said, afraid it's negative. And he was like, oh, well, our colleagues won't be happy, will they? No, they were very unhappy because I hadn't confirmed. I discovered after my PhD, I should have confirmed biases that were all statements.
Oh, I see. Okay. So what did that mean for your PhD?
Oh, PhD was fine. I got it. But it meant it was very difficult to get any work or any job afterwards.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Because I wasn't confirming.
Okay.
So it was more or less wasn't.
But you weren't confirming, but were you giving another opinion as a result?
So they didn't want another opinion.
But did you give it anyway?
Yeah, I did.
You
Well,
did,
it was
okay.
given who he was. I had no,
Yeah.
And given it was a PhD, yeah, I gave it.
Of course.
And said, okay, here's my paper. And I remember giving the paper at the annual archaeology meetings we go down south.
Ace of Spades, that looks like some kind of...
Yeah, the graffiti there is always really interesting.
Yeah. Looks
So-
like Elvis is sitting on top.
It does actually, yes. So the consequences were pretty dire because the archaeologists in Canada were pretty cross.
Yeah.
Because they're like, you should have confirmed this. We have all these statements about where rock paintings occur and what they are and what they do, and you've said negative. And I was like, well, it wasn't me, it was the engine. But if they're negative, well, then we need to think about how we are thinking about the space. So now I'm starting to risk trying not to get in anything too technical. But it's about how we think.
Yes.
That's what it told us more about how we as archaeologists think, organise data, think about the questions,
Sure.
the preconceptions in which we're collecting.
And is it within the industry also? It must be. Maybe I'm being controversial saying this, but is it easy to be influenced by other archaeologists around you to ensure that you're within the fold of thinking, as it were, rather than to think outside of it, because that then causes too many ripples?
Yes, yeah. And I didn't fit in the box.
Okay. So with the Royal Geographical Society,
I could continue not to think out of the box.
so that has allowed you to
yeah.
spread your wings and
Yeah.
be a bit more, have the freedom.
And the freedom and the fact that it's okay. They're like, think holistically, which is great. So I realised once I finished, I had to find, I wasn't going to be welcome in the fold because I was actually saying, it's equivalent of the elephant has no clothes on. What is the elephant in the room? It's that there's a problem with, I wasn't willing to do groupthink.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the thesis had actually challenged groupthink, that was the problem.
Okay.
So that's why I went to the Explorers Club, which is because they were like, yes, we like to do this sort of thing.
Hang on.
The Explorers Club accepted the fact that I challenged.
Oh, I thought it was the other. Yeah, I thought you were
No.
suggesting it was the other way around.
No.
So-
They like the challenging. They like the pushing of the frontiers. That's also when I came back here. That's why I went to the RGS. Thought this is interesting. I like them. And then a couple of the people who are fellows said, "Oh, you should really become a fellow because I worked with them in Namibia." So they said, "You actually know. You've worked with us. We've seen you on the ground. You know what you're doing. You know how to do citizen science. You know how to manage the ethics and protocols and research and all the rest of it. We'll nominate you." So I was like, "Great." Because they're thinking holistically.
Yes. And
it's okay to challenge. And it's a good idea to sort of look at the parameters of why you're doing things.
Right.
And think about how those parameters are actually influencing you.
Yeah.
In how you're going to ask that question or those questions, or even sort of say, well, why are we looking at the landscape in this way? Or why should I talk to a botanist, for example? Well, it might be a good idea because there's some plants there which actually, going back to the plants in the park, for example, those wild plants.
Yeah.
Those wild plants are important.
Everything should be a multidisciplinary approach,
Exactly.
which is what I was
Yes.
involved with. So and I totally get that.
Yeah.
And the more you involve, brings new eyes to the site, as it were, doesn't it? And,
yes.
Okay, sometimes you might go down the wrong path or not, but it's important to involve as many people as you can think with that professional capability or capacity to bring something to what you're studying.
So while I might sound sort of vague in where I'm getting where I was, but it wasn't actually. It was it was equivalent to saying, I've got to find the group of people who actually think the same way I do.
Yes. Isn't that with everything in life, though?
Yes.
And have you found them?
Yes, they're great.
Okay,
they all
very
hang out.
important. Now, coming on from that then, while I was Googling you, Alicia, sorry, I have to admit I did Google to see what came up. And you are part of a group called Women Who Know History.
Oh, that's interesting. That's because I'm also an ethno-historian.
Okay, and explain to the listeners
what it is.
It's in 2 words.
Don't know. Yeah, of course I do. It's sort of history using oral information. So it's not necessarily using the written record. So I use the written record, but I also listen a lot to people who have a tradition of having an oral memory.
Okay.
So what usually happens?
Like tales and everything, and
tales folklore and myths. So what happens usually is someone will say, "Oh, well, tell me about something according to oral history." And I'll say, "Oh, interesting." I'll listen to it, then I'll write it down, and then the task of an ethno-historian is to really find the evidence, such as photographs, maybe other written sources, to try and work out how much of that is memory invention, and how much is fact.
So corroborated by a fact.
Because the thing is, it's well known that the humans embroider, and they don't always remember things.
Mm-hmm. A story is always told slightly differently. Well, everybody will tell it slightly differently.
Everyone will tell it, exactly. And everyone will sort of think of things and remember things slightly differently.
Yes.
But there will be elements that will be the same.
Yes.
So the question is to find the evidence that works out which bits are the same, which bits correlate. I worked with a group in Constance Lake, which is Hearst, which is a northern mining town in Canada. This is a good example to understand how an ethno-historian works. This group had been approached by a Chinese firm to sell the phosphate that was in their land. Now these people had always lived there. They, according to their oral memory, they had always lived there.
Yes.
They hadn't lived anywhere else. They'd moved maybe once, but they couldn't remember why.
Right.
But they knew the land was theirs, but they didn't have any paperwork.
Yes.
But the thing was, if you have a contract with a corporate entity, it means you actually have to know where you live. But if you're not accustomed to the idea that you live in a house with the house has got a piece of paper attached to it, or a flat which has got a document attached to it, and has always had a document attached to it, the idea of you suddenly having to say, we've always lived here.
Yeah.
It's like,
prove it.
How do you prove it? Because it's a case you've got to prove it in court.
Yes.
If your society doesn't function that way, what do you do? Well, it usually means you get someone like me who says, okay, so I listened, and they said, well, we've always been here, and then they showed me on the map where, sort of the general area, and they said, oh, you've lived at Mama Matwa, and I was like, oh, okay. There was a team of archaeologists and linguistics, people who do linguistics, and so the archaeologists like, we have to find Mama Matwa, but we don't know where it is, and this is an area the size of northern Canada, so you're looking at sort of James Bay, and you've got the Albany River, which goes up from the Great Lakes going up. So it's like, well, where is this Mama Matwa? It means branching in the river.
Okay.
And the place is full of rivers.
Wow.
And there's lots of branches. So what do I do? What do I have? Well, I have the fur trade post records. I don't know if fur trade posts by I mean the Hudson Bay Company, which was founded in 1670. It was actually founded here in London in a coffee house, which eventually became the stock exchange.
Aha, okay.
So it's all connected. And the fur trade books really are accounting books. So we're actually looking at the notebooks of the traders, because the fur trade post was a bit like a shed. And there'd be two men in there, or one man, and he would be responsible for buying the furs off the local indigenous community, who would come in and say, I bought mink, or all the different furs, and then they would go be packed up on a yearly basis and then taken eventually down to Montreal and then shipped to the fur markets in Antwerp. So I looked at these records, which are now in Winnipeg, because they moved from London a fair while ago.
Okay.
And thought, okay, I know which rivers go up to James Bay, and between Sault Ste. Marie, which is, if you look at the Great Lakes, it's the middle one, the north, and it goes straight up.
Right.
So okay, I've got there all the way up to James Bay to try and find, so they must be somewhere on this route.
Yeah.
And I discovered that these posts have been opened and closed, because it's called a post, it's actually a little shed.
Yes.
It's probably the size of, that bus is bigger.
Okay,
So
that double-decker bus.
Double-decker bus is bigger than the post. So I realised these posts were opening and closing, I mean, sometimes in 20, 15-year periods. And so I knew that the indigenous group had, called Constance Lake Cree. They spoke Cree, and they didn't speak English.
Okay.
They spoke some French. And the elder Cree.
Because it's of the river, is it? Like
No, they just spoke Cree. It's a Algonquin language which they speak in that part of the world.
Okay.
So I don't speak Cree, but the elders spoke Cree, so I was just told, well, we moved for a reason. And so I knew, okay, this was in 2008. Everybody talking about their grandparents or their great-grandparents. So we're talking possibly sort of 1905, 1910, before 1920. And probably, well, when was the treaty signed? It was sort of 1904 for that particular treaty.
Right.
So I thought, well, I should get some data. So I looked through the records. I spent about 3 months going through microfiche, trying to find what was said. Most of the time it tells you about the weather, the temperature, and who comes to visit. But then I started to see in a couple of posts, one in particular, stories of people dying from what looked like cholera to me. So I was like, I think I'm on something, because it's suddenly talking about large numbers of people dying.
Yeah.
And the community had spoken about, we don't know why we moved.
Ah, yes.
And that period, the only way to deal with cholera was to move.
Away from the water source.
Yeah. So I suddenly realised, okay, I think I might have some. Then I realised, okay, I could write this, but it actually doesn't make an impression, a big impression. If I had some photographs, it would help. So I started thinking, well, who in Canada would hold these collections now? So I thought, well, I'll just try the McCord Museum, and I hit lucky. It was lucky. I could have tried another one first, and I found a collection of photographs by someone, and he photographed all the burial ground.
My goodness, wow.
And
so you could prove it.
So I could prove it.
Wow.
So I said, this is where you used to live. And so they said, okay, we now know where our grandparents and our great-grandparents and everybody was buried. So they told the Chinese who they'd been willing to, because what they were going to do was that as an area the size of 42 kilometres squared, they're going to take all the topsoil off and strip out all the phosphate, sell the phosphate underneath, and then put the topsoil back on again.
My goodness. So you doing the research you did, has that stopped that happening?
It, yeah.
Well done, Alicia. that is one very good example of how important archaeology is, or
ethno-history.
Ethno-history is, yes.
It can do all sorts of things. So I essentially combine what people talked about.
Yes.
And said, there are elements. You just have to find the bits. So it involves a lot of listening.
Yes.
And I've had to develop my oral memory because people don't really like sort of turn up, hi, here's my notebook of me.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Not really. No.
Well, actually, it kind of is a contradiction in terms, oral memory, and then you're writing it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also there's a traditional way of storytelling. People will talk in a circle. So you'll start at something, and then it seems as if the person is actually getting away from the subject, and they're going in a direction, then they go around, and then they come back to the original point. If you're the listener and you're thinking, but you haven't really told me what I want to know, and then they'll go round again.
Yeah.
And then they'll come back again, and you're like, okay, I learned a bit more. And then they'll go round again.
Right.
And you're like, okay, now we get it.
Now I've got it.
Now we've got it.
Yes. It's bite-sized chunks of information on each story or each cycle.
Yeah. And so that's the sort of task. And you also learn you spend a lot of time talking to someone, and the northern communities, they like pulling your leg, or they're telling a tall tale and seeing whether you can tell, is this a tall tale?
Okay, see whether you will laugh at the end of it, or whether you'll take it seriously.
Seriously, yeah.
Okay. So how does this all, talking of tales and cycles, coming back to the beginning of our cycle, women who know history?
Comes back to the fact that I was interested in the role of women in history and asking what did they do, and so I became interested in all these women who'd done all these interesting things, but weren't seemed to be making it into the print, and I was just like, why? It's just a side hobby.
Okay.
I just joined it because I thought this is actually very interesting.
Yes. And it's a way of connecting with other women.
Other women who actually do it.
Yeah.
Well, I just find it interesting.
Yes.
And I found that it's meant that you get a different view of what's happening.
Yes. Yeah.
So, for example, the archaeologists often in the 19th century, they would go with their wives out. So you often hear about them, but you don't.
You never heard their side of the story.
No. So their side of the story is interesting in what sort of measures that they had to go to in order to get an education.
Yeah.
And the network Women Who Know History is really women who are researchers who want to talk about history.
Yes. Yeah.
And say, look, yes, I have a different point of view,
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, through that way, I've actually been asked to review an article, which was quite interesting, by someone who I don't know who they are because their name is taken off.
Yes.
All about Harriet Boyd, who's American woman, and there are lots of myths about her because it's also interesting. There are myths, people who had lots of quote unquote what they call first, as in first woman to excavate on her own or something like that.
Yes.
And there's a lot of work now that's being done to sort of see, well, why are these women being given these labels? And who are the other women who've been forgotten in time? Mm-hmm. And there's lots of them.
Yes, yeah. Fantastic. I like that. It's a good thing to be a part of as well.
Yeah.
Now another organisation that you're involved. I'm surprised you even have time to walk and talk with me, Alicia. You're doing so many things, but to carry on. So you're also involved with the Scientific Exploration Society.
Right? Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And through that organisation, you've co-founded with another colleague.
Yeah.
A magazine online called Exploration Revealed.
Yes.
And how did that? How does that all come about?
That's come about. Bryony is my colleague. She's Bryony Turner. She's actually a climate specialist. Mm-hmm. I met her through an event that the RGS have called the Explore, which is a fieldwork and adventure expedition travel weekend. And people from all sorts of different disciplines come. Basic interest is that everyone likes going on expeditions and doing fieldwork.
Yes.
And so it's a means of meeting lots of holistic thinking people who, are you interested in getting someone who can track you as you go around the world? Oh, here's the person for you. That's
okay.
It's a very good event. So I met her there because she was on the stand for the Scientific Exploration Society, and we were talking about how, we would never meet ever, probably, because she's in climate. I don't do anything to do with the climate, and she would never meet an archaeologist. But we realised what was pulling the group together was that we were talking about all the things that went wrong when you went on fieldwork, and the things that bad bugs you caught, and the unwelcome visitor that came home
in your backpack or inside your stomach.
Exactly. Or the times that you went on, made dreadful errors, and you went on expedition and you came back with nothing because it was an absolute disaster.
Okay.
But do we ever talk about that? As her point was that researchers, no, never.
Okay.
We never talk about it.
Yeah.
We only talk about what's deemed positive.
Yes.
We only talk about what's deemed acceptable. But there's an awful lot of stuff that we actually learn from.
Yeah.
We agreed about this, and so then we went on our merry way, and we just kept bumping into each other at talks, at different events, and always having the same conversation.
Yeah.
So in the end, we sort of, it would be great if we had in a magazine, and we'd always think, we'd have this section and this category and that category.
Yes.
Someone who's got, for example, ethical sort of quandaries. I really like this thing, but can I take it home? No. Those sorts of discussions. We realised that, this was the same conversation, and this was 2016 when we actually met. In late 2019, she said, that's it, we've got to do something. So it's like, we're really busy. And she's like, I know, worst people to ask. What happened was, she's a trustee of Scientific Exploration Society, which is an organisation. It's founded by John Blatchford Snell, who also founded Raleigh International.
Okay, yep.
So it's all about empowering people.
Yes. And they've done a lot with young people going on various exploration missions all around the world, haven't they?
They have. So she went to have a chat with them, and they said they would back us if we wanted to do it. So we decided we would do it. Then we just got really busy, and then lockdown came, and then I WhatsApped her and I said, this is an opportune time. What are we doing other than work? Yeah, I'm really sick of Zoom, frankly. There's only so many Zoom talks I can attend.
Yes.
Yes, this is an opportune time. I'm just about to have foot surgery. She says, so why don't we do it while I'm recovering from foot surgery at home? So this is what we did during lockdown and her recovery from the foot surgery. We just said, okay, I will sit on Zoom for 8 hours and chat and sort of, we did it all.
And you launched it?
In June.
In June, okay. And the magazine is very much to encourage everyone who's been on explorations, whatever that exploration may be, to talk about the things that went wrong, things that went right, and share information and share stories, and
this is sort of how to do it. The science of sort of it's sort of like the process of exploration and sort of how to put it together. And things that we want to hear about, the things that go wrong, the things that people never talk about in their academic articles, because we've actually just got the ISSN number, so now we're an academic journal and a magazine at the same time.
Oh wow, that's fantastic.
So we're like, yes.
But what does that mean for you guys? I mean, have you got people on board to help you with the editing, or are you looking for people to help?
We're looking
for a pitch here. This is an opportunity, Alicia.
Yes, it is an opportunity. We do need people who are up for editing. Obviously, it's all volunteer at the moment because we're brand new, but we've got our platform paid for next 18 months.
Okay.
So we're exploring various models of how to make it pay.
Yeah.
And ideally, Brownie says we'd really like to pay authors, but we know at the moment we can't.
Mm-hmm.
But so let's say you have 400 words and you want to talk about something, you can.
Yes.
Because for example, there are some articles, our academic articles are much shorter, only 1,500 words, not your usual 9,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes you might have something small, but you can't place it because, an academic article's 9,000.
Yeah.
And we did it because we thought there's a niche. And we did a competitor analysis and discovered there wasn't one.
Right.
So it's like, why?
Yeah.
So why not?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you so attract all kinds of people, from people who might just say, oh, look here, I learnt this. This is a great tip for people going on an exploration to the desert or something.
Exactly.
And they can write 300-400 words of, or even less.
Yeah, or even less. We always have a kit review.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone can submit a review of a piece of kit, as long as they're not sponsored.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want sponsored, because then it's not.
Okay, so if people want to get in touch with you on that, it's there's a website.
There's a website called Exploration Revealed.
Okay.
So
I'll put it in the show notes for anybody who might be interested.
Welcome to submit. We just had a first submission for the next issue, so it's quite.
Okay.
It's like woo,
very
exciting.
Yes. Does it come out every month, or is it sort of as articles come in, or how are you doing
we have 3 issues a year.
Okay.
Because we thought about 4, but then we realised we would actually be overwhelmed and we can't actually do what we normally do.
Yeah.
So we said 3.
Be realistic.
Yeah.
and
chain
be
ourselves.
able to achieve. Yes.
Exactly. So 3 issues a year. You can talk about one of the categories, the unwelcome visitor. An article we thought about is like polar thigh, which is really gruesome, which women generally get when they go down to Antarctica.
Right.
And it's horrible. It's like frostbite.
Okay.
In the thigh area.
Right.
And it's it takes a long time to recover from.
Does it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Pretty grim.
Is it just like basically everything freezes up?
Yeah.
And is it very painful?
Very painful.
Very painful while it's defrosting, or painful while it's frozen up, or
both? Both, I think.
Okay.
From the sounds of it, it sounds pretty grim. I spoke to someone who had experienced it, and it just was like, oh, okay, I don't know, really. Does that region really appeal to me now? Sort of gave me second thoughts.
Yes, terrible. Okay.
Horrible.
And are there ways to get around? I suppose that's a.
Yeah,
there are. Yes.
There are ways to get.
It's being aware, isn't it?
It's being aware, and so we talk about what we had. We had an article on this last issue, the first one, on Kakar, which is an island in the Bismarck Sea off the coast of Papua New Guinea, which is known for cannibalism. Mm-hmm. And coconuts, and they export coconuts and cocoa.
Everything to do with sea. Okay.
So, should we go round the corner, because
yes.
it's going to end? So we just go around the block.
Sure. Weren't we supposed to be looking at some butterflies?
Yeah, but I think we couldn't go by the butterfly because of the filming.
They're probably filming it. Okay.
Probably. And so what else? Oh, we had a story of a chap who was in a boat on the edges of a hurricane off the coast of the southern US, and talks about that experience.
Okay.
And going to Fort Lauderdale from the point of view of a boat.
Right. Okay, so you very much you'll encompass all sorts of stories and
all sorts of stories,
tales and exploration missions.
If you haven't conquered Mount Everest, it doesn't matter. We're not fast.
Right, yeah.
So you don't have to go Mount Everest. Far from it. I mean. Yeah. We always have interview with a young explorer.
Yes. Because I noticed while I was just having a quick look, that a young London boy, I think, 7-year-old, has just won the honorary award for his scientific explorations of around his garden. I'm talking about snails and everything. I think it's fantastic. He's doing little YouTube videos.
Sweet, aren't they?
Yes. I've forgotten his name.
I can't remember. Yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah, he's got a Twitter account actually.
Oh, has he?
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So yes, trying to engage with his generation,
yes,
which is very important. To get people excited about science in all senses of the word, and nature.
And we had an article from Rowan, and she's 9, and because we're trying to work out how to deal with the sort of ethical issues of having someone who is under the age of 16, because all the laws start changing.
Yes.
Actually, giving them the opportunity of speaking to established explorers.
Right.
So Rowan, she's 9. She spoke to Steve Blackshaw.
Okay.
And another chap whose name I can't. And she asked them all about dealing with animals, and she wants to sort of be somebody who deals with animals.
Okay.
So I think something marine. So it's quite exciting, actually.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on getting that off the ground.
Thank you.
Good luck with your. It'll be your first edition coming out then, or is it your
first one's come out? We've got a second one coming out.
Second one coming. When does the second one come out then?
Probably in March.
In the new year?
March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Because we're busy talking to the academics at the moment, saying, okay, you've got to be in by this date because we need to send you out to peer review again.
Okay.
So it's like, look, with the magazine articles have one cycle and the academic articles have another cycle.
Right. Okay. Well, we're back on the main road again.
I know.
Oh, we'll be fine. Let's go. We'll just go down a side road. So talking about articles and writing and magazines, you write a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
Both in terms of serious stuff. But what I loved is that I found a couple of articles that you'd written, one about avocados and another one about chocolate.
Oh, I like chocolate and I like
Yes.
avocados.
But that's food archaeology. I mean, what a great subject. I mean, that's the kind of archaeology I would like to get involved with if I did do archaeology. And you wrote those for, I've forgotten the name of the magazine now.
It was something called Wonk Magazine.
What was it called?
Wonk Magazine.
Wonk Magazine.
It was a science magazine.
And it's called something to do with brains. What's it called? Not training the brains.
Got a very good handle, but
Like
I can't.
modernising the brain or anyway, Wonk Magazine.
Yeah, and I liked it. It was the idea that trying to get a recipe was always combined with it. It's the idea of trying to get people to realise there is actually quite a lot of information behind the stuff that we eat.
Yes.
The editor liked it, the column, but we were not sure whether the general public liked it so much.
Okay.
So I now have one on olives. I have to do something with. So
with olives?
On olives.
Okay.
I find it fascinating when you look at something like the chocolate bar.
But you learnt about the chocolate, the cacao and the cocoa butter and everything, but just the origins of where some of these, where the plants originated and where you think they are, not necessarily where they are now as well.
Exactly, and I find that really interesting, especially since earlier on I was telling you all about where you could get these incredibly interesting avocados.
Yes.
And thinking about why is it you get avocados in those areas? Well, it goes back to Pangea, which is sort of a bizarre concept that we have an avocado in various parts of the globe, all back to the fact when all the continents were connected together.
Yeah, and that's what the Pangea is.
Yeah.
And also you talked about the various sort of dinosauric animals that ate the avocado, including one that had 4 pairs of tusks as well.
Sounds gruesome, doesn't it?
Does sound very gruesome. So if you're interested in learning more about avocados and why they're still here, I will put a link to that article that Alicia wrote, because it is fascinating.
I don't know whether you could say knowledge is cool, but sometimes I think it is.
Yes.
It's just like, that's like to think that the reason that they've got their shape is because a bunch of megafauna, it's like huge dinosaurs, went and ate them, is actually pretty sort of astounding.
Ate them and then made sure that they were spread around the whole landscape, so there was always a continuation of the avocado tree.
Yes.
Producing the avocados, and that's probably why, again, we've got such a prolific amount of avocados in South America, not here obviously, but have you ever grown an avocado tree?
No, we had one in Brazil in one of the houses we lived in. The house was on a split level and the garage was underneath, but you can lean out the kitchen window and pick avocados off a tree.
Okay.
I had an avocado tree.
And were they ripe? Because in Spain they pick them, they're not ripe, you have to take them indoors and then they ripen.
They were ripe.
They were ripe. Wow.
They were ripe.
Okay.
And they were those ones that you get in the Colombian store. They don't have a gritty exterior. This exterior is very smooth and they're a lot more rounded rather than pear-shaped.
Okay.
It's very good and made into ice cream.
Yes.
Avocado ice cream.
Yeah. I've never had that.
I can understand it might sound bizarre, but it's actually quite nice.
Yeah. Well, it tastes so different to the avocados you get in this country, that's for sure.
Yeah, the avocados
at
in
the
this country
supermarkets just kind of a waste of time, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, which is a real shame.
Apparently they still give you some benefit, but they just don't taste the way they taste.
No.
In Australia, the avocados were incredible as well. Well, Alicia, I'm starting to get polar hand actually from walking around.
Do you want a glove?
Polar hands. So maybe we should start to wind this up. And I wondered, just to sort of, out of all the areas and places in the world that you've visited with your research and through holiday, I suppose, as well, have you a favourite place that you've been to and also one that's you found very challenging to visit or while you've been exploring? And one that you would want to live in?
That's a good question. Well, I want
to... 3 in 1, really.
Well, Well,
Oh, we're coming back to the main road.
okay.
It's fine.
I'll just wait. Well, I did live in Montreal and I wanted to live there.
Right. And you speak fluent French as well. So.
I learned French there actually. I had a smattering of it here, but then it had to be improved because everyone spoke French and not English.
Okay.
Where? I don't know. That's a horrible question. So many places to go.
Yeah, there are. I know. I find it always is the place that I'm in that I want to be until I go somewhere else, and then I think maybe that's where I want to be. But
I think somewhere where it's interesting, in the sense there's something challenging.
Challenging in terms of the environment, or for you personally, is it? Do you prefer the warmth to the cold, or do you prefer?
I don't like the super humid. I don't like it when humidity.
Okay.
Heat that's humid. I can deal with it for a while.
Yeah.
But for as in a few days, maybe a week or two. But I don't like it after that.
Perhaps I should change the question. Say, where have you been in the world that has challenged you the most?
That's a tough one. I don't know.
Have you ever? Do you find you adapt very easily to your environment?
I adapt very easily. So I was just trying to think where places I would go most places actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just adapt. I mean, I remember I went to China for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, almost 4 weeks. And initially it was just, oh my goodness, I can't understand this. This is weird and it was a case of, I'm suddenly stuck in an environment where I can't speak the language, and for me it was unusual because I can speak a fair number, and so I was just like, I've got to learn it. That was my first reaction.
Which is very hard, which of course you couldn't.
Which I couldn't, but I could pick up the characters.
Yes.
So, and I found that was tough.
Yeah. And
it was suddenly a case of having to revert to the fact that I had no idea how to say anything.
Yeah.
And
there's no baseline to work from, is there? Yeah.
No, and
certainly not with the languages that you know. Anyway.
No, there was no baseline, and so it was a case of, okay, well, I'm just going to have to start from scratch the way I did when I was learning Brazilian the first time round. Is what's this called? And I was like, I don't even know what this called is, and I remember thinking the climate was very similar. The scenery was different. It was every sort of expectation that I had was different, but I would go back again.
You would go back, yeah. Yes, yeah.
People were incredibly kind.
Yeah.
And
where were you in?
I was in Beijing.
Okay.
And I knew I stood out, and people would come up and sort of touch you to see whether you're real.
Yes.
And that was a bizarre experience.
Yeah, yes. I had that actually in Vietnam, in the north of Vietnam, the same kind of thing, where red hair and freckles, and my friend had dark hair and was like beautifully tanned. They kept looking at us thinking, they can't understand why we look so different, but we spoke the same language. But anyway.
But the food was amazing.
Yes, yeah.
I couldn't pronounce any of it, but I enjoyed it.
Well, that's good. In fact, did you actually know what you were eating?
Some of the time. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Go back again.
Yeah, been there a couple of times, and it's changing massively. There is that huge kind of difference between the city, the urban landscape now, and the rural landscape. Right?
I mean, the
urban is now so urban and modern, which it wasn't the first time I went there.
The countryside struck me as very like Portugal in the 80s, before it really became part of the EU.
Yeah.
And it looked like the same sort of half done things, sort of lumps of concrete in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it was clearly a case of a place which was in transition.
Yes, yeah.
Well,
oh gosh.
So yeah, it's a tough question.
It is, and but there are no answers. So basically, you are a woman of the world. You will be where you will be.
Yeah, that's probably good.
For as long as that may be.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good answer.
And in terms of London, we're walking. Are we back in Burgess Park?
Yeah, we are back.
We've done an amazing route around, actually. And this looks like a wildlife. Yeah,
A
it's
pond. Some wildlife.
pond. The bridge going across. In London itself then, where do you go to relax and just away from archaeology, writing and everything else that...
Oh, I usually sort of go wandering. I like exploring new bits I've not seen before.
Okay, where's the latest place that
The
you've been
latest
to?
place I've been exploring up in Hackney, Shoreditch and all those places.
Oh yeah.
And just because, well, they were super trendy, I wasn't really interested, and now they're not so much in the sort of...
They're not as trendy as
not
those.
as trendy.
They've got a bit more...
got a bit more sort of ordinary, I suppose. I'm just curious, I want to have a look. I went wandering around quite a bit during lockdown, just sort of wandering,
Yes.
and it was very interesting just to sort of watch. I generally like south of the river.
Were you born south of the
No,
river?
I wasn't. I was actually born in Oxford.
Okay, but you are now very much a Londoner, would you say?
I suppose so. I
Are
like
you
it
a
'cause
Londoner while you're in London?
yeah, I think
Are
I'm
you
Londoner
a-
in London, and
Are you a Canadian while you're in Canada?
no, I'm not really Canadian.
Okay. Are you
Uh,
Brazilian when you're in Brazil?
Yeah, because I sound like I'm Brazilian, but
Okay.
I don't. So I'm not. But I'm too tall.
Okay.
Or no, I can mimic the accent from where I was from. So lived for a while, so I sound Brazilian.
Okay.
But I don't know. That's a good question. Where am I from? Probably English speaking. I would stick to.
Okay. All right. Well, Alicia, we've talked for a long time.
Okay.
And we've walked, and I very much
You must be
salute you
freezing.
having to walk in this cold wind that I've made you walk for hours, and I hope it all comes out clearly for the podcast
If we go
listeners.
this way, we can go into some sheltered area.
Yes, but so is there anything else you'd like to? Oh yeah, just quickly, if anybody wants to look you up or learn a bit more about you, where's the best place for them to go?
Oh, I don't. This is a horrible question. Because it's like.
So, I tell you what, is it okay that I put on the show notes how people can get?
Yeah, I'd say probably.
So you can find out a little bit more about you. Basically, what I googled and found.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I'll do that.
Use that, yeah, because I don't have a website at the moment. I realised with sort of, oh no, I'm going to have to do one. So
But you are on quite a few anyway.
yeah, I am.
So
That was the thing. I'm on ResearchGate Academia, Twitter,
Yeah.
Instagram,
all those things.
all those things.
Can I put Instagram and
Yeah.
Twitter on?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. Well, Alicia, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me on the Travelling Through podcast.
Oh, thank you.
It's been very inspiring, and I've learned a lot about you. Even though we used to have long chats in the bookshop, we never really got in depth too much, did we? There was just too many other things going on. So thank you for taking the time to walk and talk with me.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you also. I really enjoyed your bookshop. It was just like I could sort of dive into other parts of the world, sort of in the warmth and sort of, especially when the winter time. It was like, oh, it's great. I can sit here and just like look in sort of sun escapism down into the sort of little avenues.
Well, that's lovely to know that everybody has fond memories of the bookshop, as do I. But anyway, to all the podcast listeners out there, I hope you've enjoyed the podcast episode today with Alicia and you've been inspired. If you have enjoyed it, please do share with your friends. Please do subscribe to the Travelling Through podcast. That would be great. And give us a review if you have time. That would be wonderful. There'll be another podcast episode coming out next week. But for now, take care and thanks for listening.